All right, great. Welcome everybody to the Surfrider Ventura August chapter meeting. I wanted to start tonight's meeting by acknowledging that the Surfrider Foundation Ventura County chapter operates on Venturino Chumash land. The first peoples of Ventura County for over 13,000 years are the Chumash people. This is their homeland for thousands of years, their homeland today, and their homeland into the future. They're here, they love Mother Earth, and we want to honor them. Next, I'd like to turn it over to the Surfrider Foundation Ventura County Chapter Chair, Laura Orgel. Take it away, Laura.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Very happy to have Chris Goldblatt from the Fish Reef organization with us tonight. And one of the things I wanted to do first before we hand it over to Chris is to do some updates. One of the best ways to stay connected to the work that we're doing, even though we have COVID and our programs are suspended for the most part, is to join us on our social media, which on Instagram is Surfrider VC. On Facebook, it's Surfrider Ventura County Chapter. You can sign up for our newsletter off of our website. Our website's another great way to be kept up to date on what's happening with the chapter, and that's ventura.surfrider.org. And one of the commitments we've made with the current social, racial climate is to really ramp up our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this month, we're highlighting the Wish Toyo Foundation and their work in Ventura County. Wish Toyo's water initiative projects they focus on restoring California's environment and waters to ensure that the state's residents, tribes, and species benefit from clean water, reliable water supplies, and rivers with sufficient in-stream flows, unpolluted environments. They use law, science, restoration projects, watershed monitoring, advocacy, education, and community outreach in their organizing efforts. The other thing that we're really trying to focus on, I know we had Plastic-Free July, but obviously it's not just going to be 1 month that's going to help us reduce plastic pollution in our community. And so what we are focusing on now is we're trying to get ahead of the problem. So we have created these wonderful signs. You're probably seeing them in restaurants now. And we are encouraging people to only ask for to-go-ware if you need it. And certainly if you have takeout from a restaurant, don't have them put it in a plastic bag. So ahead of your order, let them know you don't want any plastic utensils, and bring your own if you're going to take the food to somewhere else and not home where you have your own utensils. Bring your own reusables, which is definitely a way to reduce plastic pollution. One of the other ways that is a little confusing to people still, I think, is when you go into a grocery store right now, you're allowed to bring your own reusable bags. You just have to bag your own groceries. If you go into Trader Joe's for, from safety concerns, Trader Joe's is not letting you bring your reusable bags yet. They will give you bags, but they will charge you for them. So if it's not inconvenient for you, it's great to put your food back in the basket and then take your cart out to your car and then bag your groceries from your reusables in your car. So those are really just a couple ways that you can stop the single-use plastic consumption on your end. One of the other there's many other great solutions that we have. They're in our newsletter, and they're also now in a blog post on our website. So please check that out, and it's really got some great tips. We're also encouraging solo cleanups in your neighborhood. If you feel a little bit more comfortable just going around your neighborhood and picking up trash, there's lots of windblown trash. Unfortunately, people are dumping. It drives me crazy, but they are. And also to go to the beach if you want and pick up the trash there. If you feel comfortable, grabber, gloves, masks, protective wear. Another thing that I'm seeing, I know everybody's seeing, which is their PPE on the ground. Grocery stores, there's masks on the ground, there's nitrile gloves, and it's really important for us to really be cautious in this time and not give in to the convenience of that plastic affords us. There's other articles in the newsletter, like the fact that the Matilaha Reservoir was drained. And we have a great article about our Hold On to Your Butts program in the newsletter as well. So again, please find us on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, sign up for our newsletter, just check out our website. We've got lots of great articles and information about our programs and campaigns on our website. So I think that's it for the updates. And our guest speaker tonight is Chris Goldblatt. He's the founder of the Fish Reef Project. Very excited to see Chris's presentation tonight. He's going to be sharing the work that they're doing on the Goleta Kelp Restoration Project. And Chris, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Laura. That was a wonderful introduction. So I just take it away from here? Or?
Yep.
Yeah, pretty much. I just want to let everybody know, if you have any questions along the way, just pop them in the chat box. We'll let Chris get through his presentation, and we'll have plenty of time at the end for questions. But if you just want to get it off your head while you're thinking about it, just pop it in the chat box and we'll answer everything at the end. So
Awesome.
Let me share my screen and get your presentation up here, Chris.
I'm Chris. I'm the founder of the Fish Reef Project. Can everybody see me okay?
Yep.
Okay, and we good to go, Bill?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Surfrider story. 1987, I was an exchange student down in Rio de Janeiro. My mom sent me down there for a summer. I can't imagine why, but I had a great time. And as a gift, I think it was one of the first fundraisers Surfrider ever did. They made this beautiful picture of Agua Dulce Mesa. It's that flat that looks over the actual Surfrider down in Malibu. And it was a depiction of the shoe match days with the tow malls going out. And I remember this really beautiful bobcat off in the bushes. And I thought it was a really wonderful depiction of sort of California beauty at its absolute maximum. And so I gave it to my host family. Hopefully they still have it on their wall down there. And I thought that was just a really good indication of what Surfrider stands for, which is keeping things natural and beautiful. So that's one. I'm honored to be here. This is my second presentation at Surfrider. I presented in front of the Santa Barbara chapter a number of years ago. So here we go, Fish Reef Project. I guess we'll go ahead and just start slide one. This was initially designed to be an hour-long presentation, so forgive me if I gloss past a couple of things. But you know, I started on the ocean at 9 years old. I'm basically working on the fishing boats out of Malibu at 9. And you know, some people might call it, you know, slave labor today, but I thought it was the funnest thing in the world. To, you know, scrub the boat and work hard, and they let us fish a little bit and develop that very early connection with the sea in a very profound way. And then at 12 years old, I went to work in San Diego at the tuna fleet down there and connected with the offshore blue water environment, and used my money to buy an old water ski boat and spent years diving in Santa Monica Bay, looking for whatever we could find. Thousands of dives, literally, and you would just swim across mud forever, and sometimes find very scary things down there, actually, discarded canisters and this and that and the other, the occasional murder weapon. And but when you would finally find structure, you would just kind of hear the angels sing, and that you would always see one or two fish a couple hundred feet away, and you would flick their tail and they would swim towards these ominous mounds of who knows what, natural material sometimes, sometimes not natural material. But the common denominator was that's where the life was. It's because that it gave the plankton a place to settle and grow, and animals a place to seek refuge. And big lobsters, halibut laying around the edge, blacksmith and yellowtail and white sea bass and everything. And the fish didn't particularly care what the structure was made out of. And that really burned into my mind that the ocean is very, very sparse when it comes to reefs. And that's why we find ourselves here today. So if you look at the picture in 1972, thriving kelp forests all the way up until 1983, when, if you're old enough to remember, we had the mother of all El Niños in the last 100 years. I suspect that was part of a 100-year cycle, and the 100 years before that, there's probably something similar. If you read 2 years before the mass, it actually talks about that, and that was written in the gold rush days. And it scoured the bottom. I mean, it really scoured the bottom. And it just pulled away all the reef material in areas that don't have natural complex reef structure, like off of Santa Barbara, with the exception of Isla Vista and Henry's Beach. And today there's no kelp there. Even though this is a pretty good kelp year, we're returning to normalcy and there's still no kelp in Goleta Bay. So that begs the question, why and what do you do about it? Next slide, please. This is Coal Oil Point, Isla Vista, right in front of UCSP, taken 2 weeks ago. As you can see, a pretty good kelp year. And there's kelp here most of the year, most years, even on bad kelp years. It's because this is one of the few places that has the dynamic ledges and boulders for kelp to attach to. And it makes for good surf there because it glasses off the waves and controls the longshore current. And next slide, please. So I took 3 pictures of this because it's really important what this is. This is the Goleta sewage outfall. And as unglamorous as that sounds to a fish or divers that like to look at fish, this is a Valhalla, basically. So it's a mile-long, 24-inch pipeline that's covered in ballast rock, which is 500-pound quarry rock, basically. And it was a short little pipeline until 20, 25 years ago, and they extended it when they added secondary, they increased the scrubbing capacity of the sanitary district. And then they have to legally cover it with these rocks to protect it from storm surge, so you get a kelp forest. Next slide, please. As you can see, just different angle here. It goes all the way out. I've been diving on it many times, and as you're about to see in this video, it's an absolute cornucopia of life. And what it does is it proves proof positive that kelp and everything that lives in kelp wants to grow in Goleta Bay. So it's not a water chemistry issue. That is the case in some places, in Santa Monica Bay and Huntington Beach. Kelp just doesn't want to grow because the turbidity. It wants to grow in Goleta Bay. It wants to come back. Next slide, please. This is taken from the pier. As you can see, it's heavy. And the Goleta Sanitary District, who supports our project wholeheartedly, did not intend to make a reef or a kelp forest. This was just to protect their pipeline. But as you can see, when you don't even try, sometimes that's when you get the best results in life, I suppose. So let's go ahead and show underwater there, Bill. Just a couple minutes here of some fairly groggy footage, but yep, you kind of see, there we go. There's a nice lingcod sitting on the seafloor. As you can see, there's, those are chert quarry rocks. They range in size from 50 pounds up to 1,500 pounds. No real rhyme or reason. They probably just went with the lowest cost option at the time to protect it. There's dulse, Turkish towel, all the small sea vegetables. And obviously there's hundreds of thousands of lobsters on it, but they're not that big because the holes are small because the rocks are small. And that's why we're going to fix that problem. When you have larger holes, or what the scientists call interstitial space, you end up with much larger breeding animals. Out deeper, as you can see, the macrocystis, or the giant kelp, grows all the way to the surface, and it's spread out about 15 to 20 feet because that's what the light allows. The light penetration is a limiting factor. So that's how we designed our reef, was around how kelp naturally likes to grow. And there he goes back in his little hole. Oh, that's probably a legal lobster. And there's red abalone on this, there's urchins, there's limpets, there's lingcod, there's white sea bass, there's everything here. I guess we go ahead and head on back. Bye for now, lobster. More Turkish style. That stuff's actually really good for scrubbing your skin. If you ever pick up a piece of Turkish towel off the beach, it's that knobbly stuff. And it's got that natural cleansers on it, those little bumps, and it really is like this great exfoliant. You can go to the next slide. Kelp beds and benefits, right? With surfers, I think it's self-evident, but I'll go down the list. So kelp forests are, the macrocystis, the fastest growing plant in the world, 18 to 20 inches in optimal conditions in a 24-hour period. And California lends itself to gigantism, the largest kelp in the world, the largest sea urchin in the world. the largest abalone in the world, the largest tree in the world. Did I miss anything? The oldest tree in the world, the bristlecone pine. So the kelp forest is the marine version of the sequoia forest, of the redwood trees. It even has a similar red color to it. That's why you get red abalone, because they eat the red marine algae. And also the same with the sea urchins. We are living in a redwood forest in Santa Barbara and Ventura County without any redwoods. It is our birthright. It really is. Scripps Institute tells us that when you have a kelp forest, it buffers the ocean acid levels within the kelp forest itself. So it'll moderate the pH. So if ocean acid levels rise as we put more CO2 into it, and we do, you can create a buffer zone for calcium-based life forms, which is a huge amount of animals. You know, the abalone, the sea urchins, the clams, the crabs, the scallops, the lobsters, anything. Those animals will suffer greatly under ocean acidification, and kelp forests are a natural buffer, especially the size of the kelp forest that mankind has unwittingly destroyed off of our area that we're going to put back. It's a big CO2 sink. It sequesters a lot of CO2. It buffers longshore currents. It's a natural sea defense. In a hook-shaped bay like Goleta, the current comes around Campus Point, and if you have a heavy enough kelp bed, logic would dictate that it would bounce off and you would get your beachhead back, or some of it back more of the year, without resorting to a hard rock revetment, which is what happened there. It's what happened at Broad Beach. It's what happened all over San Diego. And when you put a revetment, you lose the beach. That's the reality. You trade saving your house and sacrificing the beach. And I hope that doesn't make anybody uncomfortable, but that's the way I see it. So anything we can do to restore nature and naturally bring back that beachhead, the whole system is healthier for it. Local organic food supply, it's a backstop during the pandemic for food supply. Before COVID, people would laugh at that, but that's the reality. It's much higher in nitrogen than the same plant that lives in New Zealand or northern Chile. So just because of our local ecosystem, it's more nutritious. There's more shark food in it. So the more shark food that we make for the increased amount of white sharks that we clearly have. We're on Shark Week next week, if anybody wants to see that. The more shark food there is, the less likely they are to taste your thigh, you know? And then of course it makes good waves. And then abalone restoration is really important for a lot of different reasons we'll get into in a minute. Next slide, please. This is a map lovingly made by the United States Geologic Survey in the year 1912. I found it up at UCSB. It looked like nobody ever had checked it out. And they have a number of them. And they mapped all the kelp beds from the Columbia Gorge all the way down to Punta Colonet. So basically the whole West Coast. And they did it with this tender loving detail because they wanted to harvest it for fertilizer for the Central Valley. Ultimately, it got used for munitions, if you can believe that, for ammonium nitrates to make munitions for World War I. And then it got harvested later. Anyway, as you can see, this is at least 1,000 feet wide or more that just goes unbroken all the way down. And if you just look to the left of the divider line, right next to where it says Goleta Point, that little finger is the 220 acres that we seek to restore. And as you can see in the map, it indicates a very wide beach berm correlated with the heavy kelp. So there's very clear historical precedent that this is a historic kelp bed, just like you have a historic forest or a historic sand dune. It's not something that we're making up out of nothing. We're replacing what was once there. Next slide. So squint your eyes a little bit and bear with me. If you look at the coast, you see Santa Barbara proper off in the distance near that grid pattern. And the pink indicates medium to heavy density kelp. The yellow indicates light kelp. The yellow on the coast, I believe, is Rincon. If you look at Santa Cruz Island and Anacapa Island, way off towards the edge of your screen, you'll see just yellow. This is very important because when we go out to the backside at Santa Cruz now, out to Moore Meadow to go surfing or sea bass diving, we look at that and we say, look at the thickest kelp bed we have going. Look how thick that kelp bed is. Well, in 1912, it was the scrawniest in comparison to the coast. The coast was 2 or 3 times thicker than the islands. And now the coast doesn't have any kelp except for the remnants. Next slide, please. Here we go, Santa Barbara proper. As you can see, it goes all the way down. They had to use kelp cutters to get the boats out of the harbor at the time. All the way down towards East Beach and Fool's Anchorage. That was one giant kelp bed all the way down. And if you look closely, you can see the two arroyos, Arroyo de Montecito and Arroyo de Ortegas. Those were natural watersheds that would bring down the rocks and the boulders and the small pebbles that naturally roll out every year during the rains or during the 100-year storm events like we had in 2017. And that was the recharging of the reef system, was the land-based sediment and rocks. And that's choked off now because of dams from rivers, and it's choked off from the large boulders coming down because of houses and hedges and roads. And then we stop them and crack them and send them away to Caltrans or whatever we do with them, but they don't make it to the ocean. Even places like Rincon and Malibu Point are at risk of losing their natural reef system for that reason. Next slide, please. 1959 aerial shot. That was just a typical year, about 1,000 feet wide. You can see the natural distribution. This is the dead center in 40 feet of water, which is really important because, you know, a lot of the small fish start in shallow and then they need this hopping off spot out about a mile offshore, a little bit less, half a mile. And then they go to the deep. They become what you call the Sebastes complex, which is all those rockfish out there. And if they don't have that jumping off spot, they get predated on, and a lot of them don't make it back out. So it makes it hard to rebuild the deep water, what they call the deep water complex, if you don't have that estuarial migration from the shallow. So that's another really important stepping stone. Next slide, please. Right, why is the kelp gone? And it's because the rocks don't make it to the ocean and the pebbles don't make it to the ocean. That's why the kelp is gone. There are good years for kelp and bad years for kelp. 2016, 2017, gnarly double El Ninos. It weakened the kelp and then the storms came and it tears it off. But you want complex rocks on the bottom for the same reason you want chaparral on the hillsides. After a fire, the greenery snaps back the fastest when you have native vegetation because the matrix is there. That's why when you have a marine fire in El Nino, you want that matrix to be there in the form of that reef material so it can snap back. It's about climate resiliency is what it's about. So what do we do about it? Well, you get a crazy guy like me to spend 10 years with no salary and spend 40 hours a week to figure out how to fix it. And we actually are very proud to say that we have. And that is what the Goleta Kelp Restoration Reef is. And we'll get into the materials. It just needs a place to attach, but it has to be done in a way that mimics the form and function of Mother Nature rather than something that's just wholly synthetic. Next slide, please. These are the actual quarry rocks that came off the hills, which were deadly. I think, what did we lose, 23, 24 people? And untold misery in Montecito. It was just horrifying. But the natural destiny of those rocks was the ocean. Those are sandstone and chert quarry rock, and they didn't, very few of them made it there. I saw a few flushing out of Rincon Creek. And so if you can think of all of those rocks, that was the next 200, 300 years of reef material that was not allowed to go there. So I consider it our responsibility to just put back into nature what we're depriving of it in the first place. And it's such a relatively simple thing to do. There's no reason to do it. It's just that a lot of people haven't connected the dots. Kelp just needs something to attach to and a place for the critters to live. Next slide, please. Maximizing ocean potential. So there's going to be 10 billion people somewhere around 2035. What is that, 3 billion more than we have? That's a lot of people. And their consumption, their habits are going to go up. Their protein desires are going to go up. You cannot turn to land for that food. You just can't. Slash and burn agriculture, the CO2 release, the methane release from cows, the fresh water use, the antibiotic use, the petrochemical fertilizer use. And as the developing world develops, they have this choice to turn to those methods or turn to the ocean. That's their choice. So we have this amazing thing, plankton, phytoplankton, which are baby animals, and zooplankton, which are baby plants. And they float around in the ocean and they're just everywhere. And almost all of it perishes, it dies, and it becomes petroleum, right? Is ultimately what it becomes. That's why in Bakersfield and Saudi Arabia, you have oil, because that's decomposed plankton because they were shallow seas. Think of plankton as pure potential, pure unrealized potential. And if you just allow it just a fraction more opportunity to settle and grow and make up for all the reefs that humans have destroyed, you can increase the ocean output and potential using its own mechanisms. So it's a really big picture thing. Next slide. This is what, you could say this is what all the seafloor looks like. And you would be accurate numerically speaking. People think of, you know, Finding Nemo and Discovery Channel and those things, which Jacques Cousteau, which we all love. But that's not representative of what the seafloor looks like. The seafloor is mud. It's not dead, but it's mud. It's mostly evaporated. And if you take the ocean as a whole. So that's why just putting just a little bit more structure that mimics natural structure allows us to help the ocean realize its maximum potential through restoration efforts. Next slide, please. Sea caves, right? I know this is a work in progress, and you know we're really, really proud of it. These are, if you can imagine these just for a moment after they've been underwater for 10 years, okay? They're designed to be so utterly covered with marine life. Like we tested 2 similar reef units in 2012 off of Henry's Beach. We got 80 rock scallops off of 2 of them about this size. Kelp to the surface, just in 19 months. About a dozen baby species of rockfish, you know, many dozens of individuals that were using it to shelter to go to the deep, including listed species like Boccaccio, natural settlement of red sea urchins. Everything you can think of, you know, was there. And after a while, when you swim over these, you can't even tell that Mother Nature didn't put them there. But they're designed to have very large cave area to hold large animals. And what makes these unique is the amount of flat space on the back of it for the large hold fast, the base of the kelp to attach to, so it can withstand heavy storm events without tearing off. And they're made out of chemically balanced marine concrete. So we bring the pH down to match that of seawater, so things like soft coral can settle on them that are sensitive. And they are the Fish Reef Project's invention. We designed them, and we're very proud of that. This isn't a copy of somebody else's idea. It's very hard to engineer something like this and then be able to produce it. Next slide, please. These were depictions of sea domes or reef balls back in the day. I suppose this image needs a refresher, but it's just meant to depict the entire symphony of life that will be present on this kelp restoration reef. You have the harbor seals, you have the small marine algae, the sea palm and the dulse, and the bladderwrack and the giant kelp, and then the barracuda and the sardines and the giant white sea bass off in the back. Probably a couple of mermaids in there that are hiding somewhere. So that's what you get. Next slide. Just to show that this works in tropical waters as well. This is a project in Indonesia over a 5-year period. You can see the plankton just needs a place to settle and make coral. And it's a very good way to restore some of those impacted reefs down in the Coral Sea and around the world. Next slide, please. Okay, so the actual project. This swath that you see is 220 acres, and it's a sandwich. On the outside, we use natural chert quarry rock, which we'll get to in a moment. In the middle, you'll have the sea caves, and then on the inside again, you'll have more natural chert quarry rock, like you see on the Goleta pipeline, that material. You can see the Goleta pipeline going out, and this is about 1,000 yards offshore in about 40 feet of water. And although the Goleta pipeline did prove the concept for us, out of an overabundance of caution, we are applying first for a 2-acre study reef. So this is basically a science experiment. We're going to work with UCSB to do a lot of the actual science, because they have some of the best scientists in the world up there, especially when it comes to man-made reef structures like this. So that's where the study reef will go. It'll be studied for a number of years, and we'll be able to really boil down if we got it just right, or if any adjustments need to happen before we expand. Next slide. So this is the matrix of it, as you can see. So you have the sea caves, so it's a grid. Every 20 feet on center, you have either a sea cave or a small pile of quarry rock, 1 to 3 tons of quarry rock. There's still cave area between the quarry rocks, but they're laid in such a way where you can almost guarantee that a kelp holdfast will settle. And then of course on the sea caves, they'll settle on the top, and the sea caves just ensure that there's enough cave area for all the marine life to just really thrive. Because you don't want to have just a vapid kelp pen. I've seen those. It's pretty to look at the kelp, but if there's nothing else in there, it's just like there's nobody home. You really have to kind of provide for the entire marine community. And the reason they're spread out is because the kelp comes up and then it'll just dovetail like this on the surface. It naturally likes to be 15 to 20 feet apart. But if it was just littered with material, you would get too much kelp underneath it, and you might get, plus the cost. I mean, look, we want to restore the entire kelp bed all the way down to carpenter if we can. That would cost $3 billion.
Hey, Chris, you're breaking up a little bit. Can you pause and maybe go back about 30 seconds?
So that's also a consideration. So I suppose
hey, Chris, you're
what's
breaking
that,
up a little bit.
Bill, you froze.
I am still out here, but it looks like
Did I lose you guys?
Yeah, I think it sounds better now. Your video froze, but I could hear you there a second ago. Now I think we lost you as we're looking at this pretty glassy wave at what used to be oil piers.
Can you guys hear me now?
Oh, yeah, there we go.
Uh-oh. My camera's on, so I think you can hear me, but you guys are all frozen.
The video is the first thing to go, and then the audio will stay. So we can hear you if you can still see the screen.
I got you now.
Oh.
Are we good now?
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that, guys. This was the next slide. So if you're old enough to remember oil piers, there was a lot of structure out there, and even cobble on the seafloor to protect those pilings that grew kelp, and it glassed the waves off. And when they pulled that infrastructure out in the 90s, that was goodbye wave, and it hasn't come back. So it's just kind of proof positive that when you restore what nature wanted to be there, your chances of getting better surf are much higher. And I know that there's been attempts to make surf breaks out of different materials. And the reality is you have to make a silver strand, you have to make a jetty and a T to make it, will allow that. So the next best thing is a restoration project like this. It can have some ancillary benefits for waves. Next slide, please.
Hey, Chris, you are a little broken up. You may want to try just stopping your video.
Bill, I'm going to take a 2-second break here and go downstairs and see if I can make that work.
Okay,
So
cool.
Please don't anybody hang up, okay?
Sounds good. Go ahead and get reset. This is really interesting to hear all about. It's amazing what can go on underneath the water and all this stuff that Chris and his group are doing.
It'd be so interesting to see how, if there's ever been ongoing research on how big the waves are with the kelp beds in the background, just to see we could really correlate that. It'd be super cool.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. I'm not really sure if there's a surf break inside of the Goleta Bay.
You guys got me?
Yeah.
There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Go
Got
for
it. Okay, guys, I'm so sorry about that.
No sweat.
This is the Fish Reef Project. We're just a band of what I like to call true believers. 10 years. Most of us have been here since the beginning, and I just kind of rolled out of bed one day with an idea and decided to put it into action. I had no idea how difficult it would be or the journey that it would take me on, but here we are. And this was a sea dome, a reef ball that we actually put in Lake Kachuma. Put a number of them out there with the Girl Scouts in 2017 for drought readiness, because when the lake shrinks, the fish get very stressed. And so it gives them a place to live and hide. Next slide, please. This is Nemo after we put these in Papua New Guinea, which is just an incredible place. We have a beautiful reef project down there. Nemo moved into this particular reef unit within 2 hours of us putting on the seafloor, just to show you how quickly life adapts. And you can go on our website and see how Nemo has brought over his own anemone, and then has had a lot of baby Nemos, and there's shrimp in there, and there's lobsters. The whole life is there. And I fly 16 hours across the world to go visit this one fish. And it's just really incredible. There's hard coral starts. It's been down for about 14 months now, and we look forward to expanding it. And the local Papua New Guineans have a very direct relationship with their food source, because they live in their food source. So they really value tending to their marine environment like it's a garden. We were able to sign treaties to get them to stop dynamite fishing in exchange for reefs. Yeah. Next slide. Biogenic reefs versus attraction. This is probably the most important question out of all of them. Do reefs attract, or do they create, or do they produce, or do they attract? That's always the question. And the answer is they do both. The older they are, the more they produce. However, biogenic reefs are something that we're on the absolute cutting edge of. That is something that is meant to be large enough, of adequate size and scope to mimic nature, to actually yield an overflow back out into the environment, as opposed to attracting it. And the same logic applies about marine protected areas, about why they need to be of the right size and scope, because it has to be able to feed itself. And again, a biogenic reef is meant to look and function like something that nature made to the best of our ability. It's not a big pile of things. Historically, reefs can be ships, or even some nefarious materials and stuff. This is a completely different endeavor, fundamentally, making a biogenic. Get her, Bill. Right, introducing the sea cave. You've already seen us. It looks very simple, but so does a samurai sword. And those take a long time to figure out how to make. And it is the most cutting edge designed reef unit that's ever been designed. And I don't mind saying that, because we have put in the combined experience of probably 200 or 300 years of combined experience of the absolute best watermen and women in the world, that really understand what it takes to make ocean life thrive. It would take me 3 hours to explain the nuances of why we settled on this. But in simple terms, it has large cave area. It's incredibly stable. It weighs 2,200 pounds. It's 6 feet by 4 feet. It's only 27 inches tall. It's very low profile. So the water moves right through those chambers, and it's almost impossible to flip it over, even in a 100-year storm with that. And then there's a lot of space on top. They're expensive to make. They're not the cheapest use of concrete. Other designs like the domes are cheaper, but we went for productivity and quality over cost. So next slide. Just a couple different depictions here. The one in the middle is a computer modeling to make sure that it'll handle stress, because there's no rebar in it. There's something called microfiber to hold it together, so you don't need rebar. And so we did a lot of the computer simulations before we went to the real thing. Next slide. Yeah, there's basically the dimensions. roughly based off of a Japanese design. Although if you put the two side by side, you wouldn't recognize it as where it came from. But the Japanese are basically the world leaders in this technology for a long time. So we deferred to them initially. Slide. This is Chert Quarry Rock. So this is the Wheeler North Reef, 333 acres off of San Onofre, that was designed to offset the environmental impact of the San Onofre nuclear power plant warm water outfall. 30 years in the planning and making, and they're actually finishing the reef, 6 years after they decommission the actual power plant, because they have overriding liabilities. But they chose the Chert Quarry Rock because it was the most similar to what was naturally there, to the reef that they basically snuffed out from the warm water. And that's why we've gone with this material, because it's been so well tested in terms of how it operates in this ecosystem. Next slide. So here it is. You can see, I think our pictures on the right might be in the way, but that's a top down after about a year underwater. It's actually over 300 acres now. UCSB, Dan Reed and Steve Schroeder have done amazing studies. Their science has proven that the reef functions, and shall I be careful to get the quote right, at least as well as a similar natural reef. And so that's again why we're choosing the quarry rock, because of the science that has been done to basically show how well it works in our marine ecosystem. And the advisory board is an organ of the Fish Reef Project that will meet 4 times a year, run by Captain Bacon. And it's for us to get input from the community and our fellow NGOs and environmental groups. And it'll be a grant making mechanism. We'll give grants back out for studies and for duties performed related to the reef. So that's something to watch. Next slide, please. Wheeler North Reef, after about a year underwater, you can see the kelp holdfast, the small sheephead, the ochre star. The giant sea bass love it. And it's cool. You go down there, sometimes you see 50 fish over 200 pounds swimming around. It's a very cool thing to see. Next slide. Red abalone. So at the heart of the shoe mash culture in a lot of ways. You can interpret the word shoe mash a number of different ways. I mismatch. Some people say money maker. Some people say bead maker. But the beads had to be made out of something, and the fish hooks had to be made out of something, and oftentimes that would be the abalone shell. Very important for inland trading. If you look at the way that the shoe mash made their fish hooks, kind of similar to a Hawaiian hook, they were really, really advanced hooks. The way that the circle hooks came in, when the fish would take it, it would naturally hook the fish in the corner of the mouth instead of sliding down the throat. And Western fishermen, 1985, when they switched from J hooks to circle hooks, that and the abalone were they in my
Hey, Chris, you're freezing over there again. If you can hear me, I would suggest maybe stopping your video and just talking as we go through the rest of the slides, and that may save a little bandwidth on your end. Can you hear me now? It looks like Chris.
Are we back?
Oh yeah, there we go. I heard you. That's all right. I don't know if you heard my suggestion, but maybe just leave your video off and just talk as you go through the slides, and then we can try the video again at the end.
Can you guys see me? How are we doing? Can you hear me okay, Bill?
Yes, now you're back.
Okay, I changed networks again. So anyway, South Africa, Tasmania, New Zealand, Mexico, northern Japan, all have thriving abalone fisheries. And it's because they have good kelp beds. California shut our last abalone fishery in 2017 in Northern California. It's a real tragedy. It doesn't need to be that way. The abalone on the coast haven't really recovered that well. Maybe down in the southern bight, the pink and the greens. Front side of Catalina is full of pink and greens again, but not the red abalone on the coast, even though no fishing for 27 years. It's not a fishing question. It's a kelp question. The abalone feed perpetually. And the reason the Shumash had abalone forever, even with sea otters here, is because there was abundant kelp that would fall and slough and fall into the mandibles of the abalone perpetually that it needs to feed. So we can get back this historic animal if we recover the kelp beds. Next slide. Black abalone, I took this picture in Monterey a couple weeks ago. We had like a 95% die-off of these animals on the coast in the 90s, and they never recovered. They just dropped off the rocks one day. It was incredible. And I think one of the reasons besides that warm water shock was there's less kelp falling off the kelp forest and into the tide pools to feed them. That's why you still have them up in Monterey where there's more kelp. Next slide. And they're endangered, by the way, so we have to pay special attention. Now, this is where I'm hoping that Surfrider can collaborate or even take the reins. The Montecito and Summerlin sewage outfalls are just a couple hundred feet, and I'm being generous there. They look like they're 75 feet to me. The Montecito sewage outfall pumps, I'm not sure the number, it's over 1 million gallons a day of treated sewage. The Summerlin one, less than that. But it does not take the sewage out into the longshore current, and it eddies around in a circle. And it's right on Hammond's Reef where you take off, and then Summerlin, whatever the name of that break is. I personally get sick every time I dive off Summerlin. I quit doing it. There's some oil bubbling there, but that's not what gets you sick. And look, even if that was pure spring water, it would still suppress the marine growth because it needs to go out into the longshore current. By comparison, the Santa Barbara sewage outfall is 8,000 feet long, and the one in Goleta is a mile long. Why is Montecito and Summerlin, two of the richest community in the world, swimming in their own toilet? I find it unacceptable, and I don't mind using sharp words to describe it. I went in front of the Summerlin Sanitary Board. We did a full engineering study. For $3 million, you can lay what is basically a PVC pipeline with cement collars out to a mile. Yes, tertiary treatment is superior. Don't put it in the ocean at all. Put it back into the ground. If you have a couple $100 million in your pocket and you can convince the public to drink their own toilet water, I support that effort. But short of that, we need to extend those pipelines. So if Surfrider went to this County Board of Supervisors, worked with Doss Williams, floated a bond, got the contractors to bid on it, extend those puppies out a mile, and then the reefs that we make can do better, be happy to flank those with reef units or quarry rock to protect them and give them marine life a place to grow. So I hope Surfrider will think about that. Next slide. Right, this was the proposed pipeline. It's a 2% grade, which is perfect for drainage on the seafloor out to a mile. We did a full study. It can be a 16 or an 18-inch pipeline with those big cement collars. It doesn't need to be a giant, gnarly infrastructure project. It just doesn't need to be. Next slide. Right, local sustainable seafood, really important. The fishermen in Santa Barbara, most of them, really take this duty seriously. We have a very sustainable, valuable lobster fishery. Because of the tariffs this year in China, a lot of the lobsters have stayed home. So a lot of people have learned to eat our local lobster for the first time. Moderating the export situation with the California spiny lobster and abalone might be a good thing to consider. So there's more of a provincial cuisine where people come in, and there's Californians that don't even know we have a lobster. They think lobsters have claws. And it's a great backup supply when the trucks stop rolling and there's no food. For instance, if COVID had a 5% mortality rate, there'd be no truck drivers. There wouldn't be any food in the shelves. The military would be shoving pallets of food out of C-130s flying over your house, and that would be your food. Or you can go to the ocean. I would prefer to go to the ocean in a situation like that. Get food that nobody's touched, has no chemical on it. It's safe, it's clean. And we only probably have 20% of what we should have because there's no kelp forest. Next slide, please. Right, this is where I earned my title as ocean futurist, right? That doesn't mean I have a crystal ball. It means that I've been exposed to a lot around the world. And so I have a little bit further line of sight than your average person. And compaction is really what it's all about. If you think of the ocean as a political landscape rather than a place to surf or fish for a second, there's a war on for space all around the world in coastal zones and offshore and everything. It's all being carved up. Even good things, wind farming has taken up 30% of the North Sea already to where you can't navigate around there. Fish farming fills every bay and estuary in Korea, or many of them in Korea, Japan, and China. Even benign things like kelp farming, or certainly fake islands off of Dubai, fake islands built for entire airports off of Japan, right? And then you throw MPAs in there, which all have their own benefits, right? But it smushes the areas that humans can use down to something very small. And these things are coming to California, and we're naive to think that they're not. So that means making a reef that has a state lands lease associated with it that says, for the most part, only a reef can go there. It means there won't be a fish farm there. It means there won't be a fake island there. It means there won't be an oil derrick there, right? Probably wouldn't be a wind farm on it. It means that it's perpetual open green space. Think of it as Central Park. When you go to build New York, Central Park was this brilliant thing that made New York so valuable in the end. And, you know, let's see what else we got here. Oceans filling up. And that's basically it. It's a means to reduce compaction. Next slide, please. Yeah, with the Girl Scouts, we put the 2 reef units in. We didn't put enough floats on one of them and it sank. So we had the rare privilege of being able to scuba dive in Lake Cachuma. And I can't say that was that fascinating, but you're not normally allowed to do it. So we got a special permit to do that. And when we find the reef units again, we'll make sure to give you a good report, because the lake level has changed a lot. So we have to go find them again. And then the people that do fish out there report that they know where they are. And there's a lot of fish living in them from what we hear. Next slide. Political support, I couldn't ask for more. You know, whether it's from the Goleta Mayor or the Santa Barbara County Department of Fish and Game, the Sanitary District, State Senator Hannah Beth Jackson and Monique Limon have weighed in very heavily in favor of it. You know, we're very proud of that, and on and on and on. And the political alignment is very strong. However, we need to raise the money to permit, or political alignment can shift. It's just the nature of a democracy. So time is of the essence to begin permitting. It takes about a year, and we're using the same permitting people that permitted that giant reef off of San Onofre. So they know the way. Next one, please. Right, if you could see, I don't know if the pictures are blocking this, but this is a little bit existential. In today's digitized video game society, the chance to form really amazing memories and bonds between parent and child are getting more and more rare. So certainly if you get on a boat and get out of cell reception and you go out and you catch your dinner with your family members, it's a very bonding experience. So that's definitely something that needs to be preserved. There's 2 categories of fishing, sport and commercial. We're asking people to see a third one, which is subsistence. It's recognized in the northern and southern climes. Subsistence is just getting enough to feed yourself. Sure, it's enjoyable, but it's not a sport. It's about survival. And it's something that human beings have done and built a very strong instinct around for 200,000 years. And there's a very clear link between getting your food from nature and preserving nature. There's a very, very clear link. That's why the indigenous people of the world do have that respect for nature, is because it keeps them alive. And humans have an instinct for that. Next slide, please. Tons of PR. Sean Thompson did a great PSA that we ran for 2 years on KEYT with the Anacapa School. Dr. Sinclair, we've been on her show a couple times. There's pieces out in the Independent last week, the Montecito Journal this week, Shark Week's coming up, Santa Barbara Magazine a couple times, on and on. So there's no shortage of positive exposure. Next slide. Permits, not to bore anybody, but there is no reef permit in California. So it'll cost about $300,000 to permit a real reef in California. Not all of that goes to the agencies. A lot of that's for the studies and things. In Alabama, it costs $35. And it takes 1 day. In their defense, they have 4% of the Gulf coastline and 40% of the red snapper landing. So there's definitely something to it. That's an extreme example. In Florida, it's a little bit linked here. And the permitting's not all bad. It keeps people responsible. It makes sure that the right materials go in, that there's studies. But you do need a coastal development permit from Coastal Commission, just like you would do. There's no category for reefs. Fish and Wildlife doesn't issue a permit, just an opinion. And then State Lands, who's our lead agency in this, issues a lease. And then there's the federal government, the Army Corps. And NOAA also supports this as well. Cost, $3 million gets us that 2-acre study reef. And that's with us working for free for 10 years. And when you look at the amount of marine life that 2 acres of thriving reef gets you, $3 million is a drop in the bucket. It is a bargain. It really is. And again, we need $300,000 to permit, which I'm working very hard on. And then $3 million to put that 2-acre reef in the water. We'll study that for a few years. And if somebody puts up $3 million, we will name the reef for them. For instance, if your name is Jones, it'll be Jones Fish Reef. And that legacy will stand for 500 years and make marine life a huge level long after we're all gone. If you put your name on a building or a park, okay, great. It might fall down. The park might burn. Who knows what's going to happen, but the reef is not going anywhere. $15 million to make the full 220 acres. If the government was to do this, I don't even think they could permit it for $3 million. We're actually going to permit and put it in the water. $15 million, forget it. The reef in San Onofre, I don't know what the final price tag was, but it was in the multiples of scores of millions to do it. And we can do it for 15 million because most of the money just goes into the efficiency of making the reef itself. Next slide. Internationally, we have a seat on the United Nations International Seabed Authority for 7 years. I've been attending for 2 weeks a year, twice a year. We go to Kingston, Jamaica, where there's a carbon copy of the UN, and all 170 countries and their delegates from the UN go down there. It looks just like the UN. And we meet, and what can I say? It's high level stuff. And there's about 5 groups that are involved in helping to manage the ultimate way that international waters are managed when it comes, in this case, to mineral extraction. The minerals that are going to run the wind turbines and the electric cars and the cell phones of the future, solar panels, they're going to come from 15,000 feet of water from deep sea mining. And it's been underway for 23 years, the discussion to create the code to do it. And until COVID hit, it was imminent. Now it's a few years out. But sitting alongside Greenpeace and World Wildlife Fund and IUCN and the Pew Charitable Trust and the British Commonwealth, we have a very real voice in this, and I'm proud to say we actually got code in there that requires restoration to the seafloor from environmental impacts that wasn't there before. And 7 years, 1 line of code, that's dedication. Next slide, please. Papua New Guinea, again, one of my favorite places. There's no coral bleaching in Papua New Guinea. And right across the street in Australia, the Great Barrier Reef is hammered by coral bleaching. I can go into reasons why that is in private discussion, but that's one of the reasons besides the amazing people, we make reefs there because they stand the greatest chance of surviving. And the biodiversity is just off the hook down in PNG. I mean, it's really amazing. And it's a place they say, expect the unexpected. It's not without its challenges, that's for sure, but we love working there. Next slide. The Great African Food Reef. So through our relationships with the United Nations, starting in Senegal and Somalia after 35 years of civil war, as part of the stabilization there, we're starting very large projects that are going to work for the next 20 years all the way down both coasts of Africa to form what is the Great African Food Reef. And it's a way to feed millions of people, employ millions of very small scale fishermen. It's about female empowerment because they're the ones that sell the fish for the men and manage the operations on the back end, and provide critical nutrition in places that are drought sensitive. It's a drought proof food source. It's a chemical proof food source. It's a low carbon food source, but you have to allow the plankton a way to thrive. And that's what we're doing. Next slide, please. Right. So I think I made it clear why I do this. And the answer is, it's because it's the highest possible good that I personally can conceive of. And I was involved in a horrible boating accident in 2003, and just bobbing around out there in the water in the middle of the night. It was kind of the deal I made, that I would, if all of us were going to survive, that I would do something like this. And so it's a matter of keeping a promise too. So I always like to say that to do something like isn't easy, and it takes courage, and it takes strength, and it takes vision, and it takes leadership. And the Fish Reef Project has an abundance of those things. And so we welcome like-minded people and organizations to join us to create a better tomorrow. And I'll take your questions. Thanks. I don't have any audio.
Yeah, I'm coming back.
There we go. Oh, I go. Yeah.
I unmuted myself just to thank you so much, and Chris, such a remarkable presentation. We're Cassie and I are like completely blown away by how much you've done and how dedicated you are and how knowledgeable you are. It's like
Thank
crazy.
you very much.
All right.
Appreciate that. It's very
Crazy.
kind of you.
All right.
Nice. Yeah, and Cassie chimed in the chat. She could watch that video footage all day. So cool.
Yeah.
Greg had a question. Looks like you answered it during your presentation. Ian was asking, what is the 28-day strength of the concrete you're using for the sea caves?
About 7,000 PSI. And that's kind of a technical question with a technical answer, right? And it's done basically, there's core samples taken of every pore, and that's basically the tensile strength, which is load bearing. It's strong enough to make a a high rise out of it. It's very, very strong. It's a very dense formula, and expensive because of that.
And I think you kind of touched on the next question a little bit from Kathy, but maybe there is a more specific number. What is the life expectancy of the concrete sea caves in the marine environment? So
this particular formula of concrete has been used about 1 million times around the globe, in both tropical and temperate waters. And so, there's 100 peer-reviewed studies on our website if anybody wants to see them, and a few of them deal with that. So the expectation is 500 years. I think in a coral climate, it's much longer, because even if the coral gets into the concrete and breaks it down, the coral grows on top of coral. So for all intents and purposes, I would just kind of say permanent in that regard, in a coral setting. And do these, Cassie wanted to know, do these sea caves have potential to be used in deep sea coral reef restoration projects, perhaps in areas that have been severely damaged by bottom trawling? That's an excellent question, Cassie. So the similar systems have been have been actually seeded with deep sea coral that, I think you're probably talking about, what, 400 or 500 meters, something like that.
Yeah.
For really deep. So there was some moderate success for that, but bottom trawling at its worst basically removes the viable ecosystem that's down there, right? At its worst, it doesn't always do that, in all fairness. So you have to replace that complex ecosystem that's been impacted by something, right? And so yeah, it would be. We are doing some experiments in the deep sea coming up.
Wicked. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I don't see any other questions in the chat box, but if somebody may have one and wasn't able to type it in there, feel free to unmute yourself and speak up. I'll give people 10 or 20 seconds to go ahead and do that if anybody's interested. And Chris, actually, during your presentation, you got a little broken up when you were talking about Pratt's Reef that Surfrider helped to place down in El Segundo
Mhm.
back in the 90s, and it ultimately
Mhm.
cost Surfrider more money to take it out because it
Mhm.
failed than to put it in. Can you
Mhm.
maybe explain the differences in types of artificial reefs and how your project may not necessarily be an artificial reef or some of those specifics?
Yeah, yeah, I love that question. So, um, that was a courageous attempt to try to create a good surf break that might have even historically been there for some reason that I don't know about. Um, but it is tough to use anything that is essentially temporary, such as sandbags like that. The ocean's just too rugged. It's just too rugged of a place, and it'll really it'll really put you in your spot. Um, but again, the biogenic reef, which is what we make, which is meant to mimic natural form and function of what nature already has put there in the past, ultimately, and to create enough life that goes back out into the ocean instead of just attracting it. Like a ship is a great place to dive on, they're a great place to fish on, but they are an attraction device because of the limited size of it. It's not something that's going to build an entire ecosystem in the conventional sense of the word. And then, when it comes to making surf break reefs, like I mentioned, um, we don't do that. We get asked to do it a lot, but the only way that I can see to do it is to make an actual jetty with the T in front of it, like Silver Strand or what's the crazy body surfing place, and what is it?
Oh, the wedge.
The Wedge, right? Perfect example. That's kind of it. It has to be a highly aggressive thing for the most part.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I tend to agree there for sure. We have a question from Greg. If you're willing to share, as a fellow boater, Greg would like to hear more about your accident, if that's something that's not too personal for you.
If you don't mind me tearing up, I'll tell the story in a nutshell. Um, in '03, we went out, five of us, old friends out of San Diego, on a 45-foot private sport fisher. We just drove down from Monterey, and I had a bad feeling. I said, let's leave during the day. It was 2 p.m, and they said, shut up, go to sleep. Okay, so I went to sleep, and there were 3 of us down in the forecastle, and the 2 older guys were driving the boat out. And at 2 a.m, at full speed, 22 knots going to San Clemente, they went between a tugboat and a petroleum barge, and they just got close pinned on a giant chain hawser that was going into the water, and it stopped the boat cold. Just it was like running into a wall or something. And I didn't know what happened. I was in my boxer shorts, and I managed to the boat was actually just about to break in half. This giant, thick, heavy boat. And I took one look up, and I got time compression, and I was a captain for years and years, and I gave the order, just abandon ship, just jump. And I don't know if anybody heard me, but I jumped, and I just, all the skin was just torn off my legs and arms from just different things. And the boat came loose and went under the barge. And the owner and the daughter went down with the boat. And it's a beautiful 15-year-old girl with her father, a dentist who I knew dealt with for years, went down as the boat sank under the barge. So I was out there by myself, and the barge floated away, and I yelled every cuss word I knew, and that was it. It was freezing cold. I couldn't feel the water because of the adrenaline. But I managed. The owner's wife made him put a raft on there the day before. So he bought the cheapest self-deploying raft he could buy, and the bow was just going down. And I managed to get to this thing and deploy it as it was all tangled up, big mess, and it just exploded violently. I don't know if you ever heard one of those things. Just, and so I got in it, and 2 other guys jumped, and they heard it, and they found it, slithered in, but the boat was pulling it down. They had to somehow cut it. And the owner and Tony and his daughter popped up off the other side of the barge because there's no propeller. It's a drone. They lived, and they managed to slide in. And that started a whole harrowing thing where we had just had hypothermia, and I was lighting up flares, and we were bleeding to death, and we ended up down off of Tijuana, and the next morning Border Patrol found us, and it was pretty close. And
Wow.
that kind of thing will ring your bell for sure. So even now, before I go out on the ocean and stuff, it's not the easiest thing in the world. And so the project has been cathartic like that, but that is definitely the deal I made. Wasn't that just if I could live, but if everybody could, and everybody did. And the Coast Guard did a flyover the next day. They caught up with a barge in Long Beach, big scrape down it. And they said it looked like a plane wreck. It didn't look like a boating accident. There was just debris for miles.
Wow.
So that's what happened there.
Yeah, pretty intense. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
I don't see any other questions. Laura, do you have any final comments to help wrap up?
I do. Chris, are you looking for volunteers? Are you looking to increase your work capacity? And if you are your worker capacity, if you are, how does everybody get a hold of you?
Right, just send us a message. It'll come to me or the graphic designer Jen, right on the website. And I encourage everybody to kind of comb through that because it's a very content-rich website, and there's a lot that I haven't talked about. But yes, we love volunteers, and you know the actual construction happens fairly quickly. So volunteering at this stage is mostly involved in just kind of sharing literature and information, and helping people better understand the project.
And if we happen to have $3 million, we write the check to you? Is that how that works?
Just to the Fish Reef Project. It's a 501c3, and
okay.
And we'll start permitting the very next day, even 300,000. We'll start permitting the next day. Everybody's sitting here waiting for us saying, have you started permitting yet? I'm surprised the governor hasn't called me, but he's pretty busy right now.
Well, Chris, I have one question too. With your research, is it primarily ran by students at UCSB, or is it through volunteers, or who's helping you with the data collection once they've actually been installed, so on and so
forth?
Right.
So there's a private environmental consulting firm that is charged with doing the baseline studies, and then the required 5 years of monitoring. So that's something we just hire out. But the larger sort of permanent research that we've invited UCSB to do through Bren School, they'll design their own studies. If we have the cash, we'll provide the grants for it. But it's not limited to them. Certainly, Channel Islands or any accredited school that has a study in mind should come talk to us.
Awesome.
There's a million things to study. One thing that Surfrider might be interested in, or somebody else, is a live reef cam. So, you know, we'll have a dozen GoPros that we change that are infrared, but we would like a real-time 3 or 4 cameras with a cable that goes into Goleta Pier and then goes all the way to the beach. It would get millions of visits because very few people have real-time cameras underwater like that. They're always, you know, time-lapsed and changed out. But just to be able to be like, hey, let's look at who's swimming by on the Goleta Reef, that's a big deal. So that's something that we want to do.
Well, I think
you never know what you're going to see.
I think we're good. Yes.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much, Chris. We really appreciate your time and your experience, your dedication, and we look forward to keeping in touch and seeing how the work goes. Definitely the progress. All right, and we'll check into extending those pipelines for you.
Yeah, please do that. Please keep me posted. So, and thank you for helping Ocean Life thrive.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Chris. That was great.
All right, take care. Thank you.
Bye, Bill. Thanks, guys.
You.
All right, I'll sign off now.
Bye.
Bye.